So the Treaty of Fort Laramie recognizes all the lands of the plains as native territory. It's actually called reservation in the treaty. Um, Nevertheless, the treaty violations occur. The U.S. government promises to defend and protect native rights to the plains in exchange for peace in the plains and protection, a promise of protection to those settlers who are just supposed to pass through. Okay, they're just supposed to pass through. Well, of course, the increased number of settlers will cause a depletion of the buffalo, and so native people grow angry and they attack pioneers, and the U.S. government feels justified in breaking the treaty or violating the treaty terms. Okay, so the trails that go through, that pass through Indian territory, who's going, where are they going, and in what number or volume are they going? Well, large numbers, thousands of American merchants travel into the American Southwest. Okay, so at this time, this is Mexico's territory. They're traveling into Texas. Now, in the 1830s, the U.S. government kind of backs off of that, and the Mexican government invites Americans into the territory. What they hope to accomplish, the Mexican government, is to have white encroachment solve their Indian problem, their violent and volatile Indian problem. So the Mexican government invites Americans in, and many of them go in via the Santa Fe Trail. Merchants go in for trading. They travel in caravans. It's hostile Comanche territory that they travel through. So going from Independence, Missouri into Santa Fe, New Mexico is the Santa Fe Trail. You have the Oregon Trail that's traveled by many farmers, a lot of new immigrants, new German, Dutch immigrants travel from the Midwest after the Panic of 1837 into Oregon for farming opportunities. We also see the first Americans really in the 1820s go as missionaries, and then by the 1830s, many merchants have gone in and just farmers. And we talked a little bit earlier about the draw, like the push and pull factors. What are the things that entice Americans to come into the Oregon territory? Opportunities for trade with Asia, farming, large lands in the Portland area, beautiful fertile farmland in that Portland, Oregon area. Many people see it as opportunity, and so they take Conestoga wagons and they travel across the Great Plains. Now, this is not an easy trek. Death, starvation, Indian attack, these are just daily perils that many of them face. And then the Sierra Nevada mountain range is the most challenging obstacle that most of them face. The Donner Party, they get caught in the Sierra Nevada mountains during a winter, and those that survive because they ate others who perished. Some of them take push carts. Now here we see one of those Second Great Awakening religious utopian style experimental communities that thrive and flourish. This is the most successful religious group of the Second Great Awakening that experiments with new ideas. The Mormons began in the 1820s in New York. Joseph Smith had revelations. An angel, he said, appeared to him and told him where to find some scrolls, and he found these scrolls, he said, and transcribed the messages in the scrolls, and that later became an addition to the Gospels. And so he founds what we now know as the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Joseph Smith and his followers move from New York. They're persecuted quite heavily. They move into Missouri for a short time, but under heavy persecution, they end up in Nauvoo, Illinois. Now, in Nauvoo, Illinois, they have a great deal of freedom because some leaders in the community convert to the Mormon faith, and their numbers grow. There's like 60,000, somewhere between 30,000 and 60,000 Mormons by the time we see the mid 1830s, 1840s. Joseph Smith is jailed because his teachings are a little bit radical. Once they reach Nauvoo, he says he has a revelation that sanctions polygamy. So the men of the church take multiple wives. And some of the basic teachings, he said that Christianity had been diluted, and the strength and the patriarchal heritage of Christianity had been diluted. And one of its premises is based on strong leadership of men in the community and in the faith. And many men saw an appeal and attraction to the teachings of Joseph Smith, and many women did too. Some had lost a sense of hope, and with the changes in their world around them, the market revolution, the transition in American society, they longed for a way of life that they had lost. And so the Mormon church and its focus on hard work and a strong a strong male-dominated society appealed to many people. Joseph Smith is assassinated. He's in jail. He's jailed, and then some people of the community break into the jail and kill him, and then Brigham Young takes the followers out into Salt Lake City, Utah. So we're talking about a group that's impacted by the Second Great Awakening and religious revivalism, but they're also a part of this Manifest Destiny Go West feeling also. So they take a trek that's called just the Mormon Trek, and they are actually fleeing religious persecution. They're ultimately fleeing the U.S. government. So you have people that are going into Oregon and Texas and Santa Fe, New Mexico, and Mexican territory, and they're taking with them their superior American ideals, where the Mormons, in contrast, are fleeing some parts of American life, and they hope to create a perfect community. Think, utopian society. They're hoping to create a perfect community out in this commune in Salt Lake City, Utah, a society that's based on more equality. And we see like the redefining of marriage and sexual relation with the Mormons. So it's very interesting. In 1842, the Webster-Ashburton Treaty will settle for a moment a dispute on the border in this Oregon territory. Settlers in Oregon, though, American settlers outnumber British settlers, and they want annexation. They are rallying for annexation or being added by the U.S. government, and their rallying cry becomes 5440 or fight, 5440 or fight. And so in 1846, the U.S. negotiates a treaty with Britain to annex or add the Oregon territory, and the 49th parallel becomes the boundary between the U.S. and Canada. So the U.S. doesn't end up with all of the territory. It's not to the 5440 line, it's to the 49th parallel latitude line. And one of the reasons that the U.S. was willing to negotiate is because a war with Mexico was looming on the southern border, and James K. Polk, president at this time, wanted to neutralize the threat with Britain and appeal for peace with Britain in preparation for hostilities and war with Mexico. And so there was a treaty arranged there. So now let's talk about Americans in Texas. The U.S., the Mexican government had invited Americans in hopes of dealing with their Indian problem. Now, Mexico had gained its independence from Spain in 1820, and the government of Mexico was primarily farther south in the Yucatan and what is present-day Mexico City, but in the territories of New Mexico and Texas, they had very little control there. Natives ravaged the region, and settlers who tried to inhabit those territories of Texas and New Mexico dealt with a constant threat of Indian attack. And so the Mexican government, their theory for fixing that was, let's get settlers to come in. Let's do what the Americans did. If you increase white settlement in the region, then natives are just going to naturally decrease in number. So land impresarios like Stephen F. Austin and he's an American. The Mexican government gives him thousands of acres of land in Texas to get settlers to come into that colony. So Austin creates a colony in Texas of Americans. There are about 300 families that he brings in from various parts, mostly the American South. He gets people from Tennessee to come into Texas, and he establishes a colony, an American colony. So you're talking about an exclave. This is a community of Americans that are in Mexico, and they bring with them their very American ideals. They want self-government. They bring slaves. The Mexican government has abolished slavery. So there's going to be a lot of conflict that develops out of Mexican ideals of what it means to live in Mexican territory, and then these American ideals of self-government and control of one's own political affairs. So, and by the 1830s, Anglos or whites outnumber Texans 10-1, or they're called Tejanos in Texas. So the Anglos or whites there have the dominant representation in the population. They appeal for autonomy, and they appeal for more rights in governing themselves. Stephen F. Austin goes into Mexico City, and he ends up being jailed. And so a revolution is on the horizon. They jail Austin, and the Texas independence movement begins. So Americans in Texas begin an independence movement. They start to talk about independence or possible annexation by the U.S. government of Texas. The first fighting is at the Alamo, when Antonio Santana will bring in a Mexican force to seize any guns and suppress the rebellion there at the Alamo. Well, this is one of America's great last stands. Davy Crockett, William Travis, Jim Bowie, 3 frontiersmen, very popular men, die at the Alamo. 187 defenders of the Alamo agree to fight to the death, which Santa Anna had already said that there would be no quarter. So it was, even if they had surrendered, they would not have been provided quarter. They were all going to die. And so they all fought to the death, trying to defend the Alamo. William Travis had sent previously out a series of letters. One got to Sam Houston: bring reinforcements. We need help. Come, please come now. Help did not come in time, but after those nearly 200 men died at the Alamo and the women were allowed to go and tell Americans, don't come to Texas, a rallying cry began, remember the Alamo. And so Sam Houston and many Tennessee volunteers will create a militia to fight against Santa Anna and the Mexican government for Texas independence. Texas wins its independence in just a couple of months, and they will be the independent Republic of Texas for about 9 years. Throughout that time, they have a lot of financial problems, and they reach out to the U.S. to annex them or add them on. And the U.S. is very leery about annexing Texas because of a potential war with Mexico. But things change in 1844. After the presidential election of 1844, James K. Polk runs on the platform of Manifest Destiny. Elect me, Polk, and we'll add Texas and Oregon as two territories to the Union. James K. Polk wins the presidential election, and he sees that as a mandate. It is an approval from the people. They want expansion. They want annexation. And so he not only does Polk want to add Texas, but he also wants the territories of New Mexico and California. And so Polk gives Slidell, he's a Louisiana senator, he sends him as a diplomat to Mexico City to offer to purchase New Mexico and California. They will not even see Slidell. So Mexico rejects any negotiation because